It's been called a U.S. presidential campaign unlike any other.
And we are all together going to make America great again, folks.
We don't back down. Not now, not ever.
For more than a year, the candidates traded verbal attacks on each other.
He bankrupted his companies not once, not twice, but 4 times.
Her criminal action was willful, deliberate, intentional, and purposeful.
And on China.
When was the last time anybody saw us beating, let's say, China in a trade deal? They kill us.
They're also trying to hack into everything that doesn't move in America.
2 different visions, 2 different worldviews, but only one will be named President of the United States. How will the result impact the world? A CCTV America special presentation starts right now.
Live from Washington, this is a special edition of CCTV News.
It has been long, bitter, contentious, not to mention expensive. But today, an election that has captured the attention of the world comes to an end. We should know the winner just hours from now as voters elect the 45th President of the United States. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm Mike Walter.
And I'm Elaine Reyes. The impact of this election will be felt for years to come all around the world. Over the next 4 or more hours, we'll explain how this election affects you no matter where you lived. Here's the rest of this hour's team in the United States. Nathan King and Sean Calebs are inside each campaign's headquarters. Jim Spellman is in the critical state of Ohio, and Asiya Nandar is live at the White House.
But it doesn't end there. From Havana, we'll be talking live with Michael Voss. Julia Labova is about to join us from Moscow. Richard Bestick is in London, and Tian Wei, anchor of CCTV's World Insight, will join us from Beijing. That's in just a few minutes.
And polls have now closed through much of the eastern United States. Take a look at where things stand at the moment. Just moments ago, Hillary Clinton added 5 states to her win column: Delaware, Washington, D.C., Maryland, Massachusetts, and New Jersey. Donald Trump just added Oklahoma, of course, the first person to reach 270 wins.
And we will explain how this is all calculated in just a moment. Throughout the night, as we go through this map of the United States, when a state turns red, that means that Donald Trump has won that state. Blue is a victory for Hillary Clinton. Each state will get the candidate, each state helps to win, I should say each state win gets the candidate closer to 270. And at the bottom left corner of your screen, we'll be updating that count in real time.
So for the first time tonight, let's check in with CCTV's Nathan King and Sean Calebs. Sean is with Hillary Clinton's campaign.
And Nathan is with Donald Trump's. Nathan, what is the mood there right now?
Anxious. They're nervous. I've been walking around here and people are not taking their eyes off the screens behind me. Of course, they're tuned into Fox News, the more conservative of the news channels you can get here in the United States. And everything's kind of gone according to plan so far. All the states that are traditionally Republican have gone Republican. All the states that are traditionally Democrat have gone Democrat, with a couple of exceptions. Georgia, just north of Florida, traditionally a Republican state, too close to call. We're also seeing other states too close to call. Those are the ones to watch. But I can tell you here, there's real nerves. He's come this far for an improbable candidate, one step away from the White House. But the problem is, can he make that step further? And there's some real nerves here right now, I can tell you.
All right, Nathan, thank you so much. We'll check back in with you very soon.
Again, right now, Clinton with 44 electoral votes, Trump with 31. Again, as they say, the night's still very young. We want to see what it's like inside the camp of Democrat Hillary Clinton. Let's go live now to Sean Calebs. Sean.
We're here at Hillary Clinton's campaign headquarters on the west side of New York, and behind me you can see the stage. In just a matter of hours, a short time, it's expected she's going to come out what she hopes will be a victory party. Inside this building known as the Javits Center, there is a literal glass ceiling. She is hoping to break the figurative one tonight to become the first woman elected president in the United States. It's really going to come down to the swing states. Among those hotly contested states, Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and many of these have gone Democratic in the past, but Donald Trump has certainly tapped into a disenfranchised voter bloc here within the United States. Indeed, many polls show that they're dissatisfied with both candidates. Clinton is playing up her experience, saying that she is going to be the one that unifies this country, not divides it. She's really reaching out to African American voters, Latin American voters, Latinos, Hispanics, as well as Asian voters. And if she can get those people to go to the polls, she should be able to get enough of the 270 delegates, 270 electoral votes needed to become the next president of the United States. Mike and Elaine, back to you.
Well, before we go any further, we should explain some of the quirks of this election. It's not as simple as just counting all those votes and declaring a winner.
That's right. It is not easy. There's a complicated process called the Electoral College. And here to break it all down for us and help us understand is CCTV's Asiye Namdar. She joins us live from the White House. Hi, Asiye.
Hi, Mike and Elaine. It's important to point out the loser of the popular vote has actually become president 4 times in U.S. history. As you mentioned, that's because of something called the Electoral College. Let's explain how it all works. Each state plus Washington, D.C. is assigned a certain number of electoral votes. The number depends on its population size. Bigger states get a bigger number. California is the nation's most populous state, so it has the most electoral votes. Only 3 electoral college votes. So on election day, officials in each state count the votes. Whoever gets the most is declared the winner in that state. And based on that, the state's electoral votes are awarded. Those state-by-state tallies continue all night, and the first person to get the magic 270 number wins the election. And if that's not complicated enough, consider this. There are 2 states in the U.S. that don't have a winner-take-all system. In Maine and Nebraska, electoral votes are awarded on a proportional basis. So you may ask the question, why? Why not simply count the total number of votes nationwide and declare a winner? Well, the authors of the U.S. Constitution actually wanted it this way. It was seen as a compromise between letting the people of the country choose a president directly and those who wanted Congress to decide. So the most important number to remember tonight, 270. Whoever gets 270 wins and will become the next president of the United States. Mike and Elaine?
All right, thanks, Asiye. And again, we are updating that tally in real time in the lower left corner of your screen. We want to bring in Eleanor Clift, political analyst for the Daily Beast, for her take on what's been going on so far tonight.
Before we do that, though, I just want to point out what Asiye was talking about. We're already seeing Donald Trump leading in terms of votes, Hillary Clinton leading in terms of electoral votes, and that's obviously more important, and we have seen this in the past.
Right, and maybe we should explain what electoral votes are. Each state gets a number of votes according to how many members of Congress they have, and that's apportioned on population, plus 2 senators. And so Florida, for example, I think it's the 2nd biggest prize after California, 29 electoral votes, meaning they have 27 congressional districts, 2 senators. And those who have been watching this race think that if Hillary Clinton can win Florida, that she stops Donald Trump right then and there. So that's why there's so much focus in these early voting as to who's voting for who in that critical state.
It is a peculiar system in that they go to states like New Hampshire and Iowa, which have very few electoral votes initially when this process all begins, and then they focus on these states with the big cache of electoral votes at the end.
Right, and then you could have a race that is so close that a state like New Hampshire really matters. And Al Gore, who won the popular vote in the year 2000, fell short in electoral votes. He lost his home state, and if he had won New Hampshire, he would have been president. So we can do endless calculations, and some people think that a tie is even possible, and we're not even going to get into that. That gets really complicated, but it doesn't look like a tie is in the making this evening.
We've seen the numbers sort of change just within the last 10 or so minutes. Right now, Associated Press has Hillary Clinton with 44 electoral votes, Donald Trump 31. He started out pretty strong earlier in the evening.
Yeah, but these are what we call the safe states. The red states for Donald Trump, Oklahoma is one of them. I don't think that's going Democratic, certainly not in my memory. And Hillary Clinton is winning predictably Democratic states. New Jersey, a pretty big one, but Vermont, she's winning. And the District of Columbia, which is where I live, I think we have 3 electoral votes. So these are not states that are a surprise. Each side was expected to win these states. The so-called battleground states are still out there, the big ones, and they will decide the race.
In your memory, you've probably never seen a campaign quite like this one. What stands out as you look back on this? I know it's coming to an end. A lot of people are like, mercifully, it's coming to an end. Right. When you look back, some of the turning points along the road.
Well, for Donald Trump, there were so many turning points that somebody once remarked that we covered him like a long-running obituary. Like after every outrageous thing he said or did, we'd think, well, that was the end of his candidacy. And yet he continued to have such strength among the people who believe in him that he said at one point he could stand on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and his supporters would not leave him. So he is a phenomenon, and he has touched into an anger in this country of a portion of the population that feels like they've really been left behind economically. And this is a very unusual message coming from the Republican Party. It's a populism on the right. And whatever happens this evening, the Republican Party and everybody else is going to have to come to grips with what Donald Trump has meant to this political process and how he has reshaped not only the Republican Party, but probably also the Democratic Party.
Well, and Eleanor's going to join us throughout the evening. We're looking forward to your insights throughout the night. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Eleanor. Well, when Donald Trump first entered this presidential campaign, very few people, as Eleanor pointed out, thought that he had any chance to get very far, let alone become the Republican Party's nominee.
Some experts have pointed to the rise of a populist sentiment that she just mentioned here in the United States. That's the same theory that experts have used to describe a different political surprise, Brexit. UK voters stunned the political pundits with their decision to leave the European Union.
And here to talk about some of the parallels and the impact of the U.S. election is CCTV's Richard Bestick. He is live for us in London. So, Richard, Trump was one of the few U.S. politicians who predicted that Brexit vote.
Hello, Mike. It is. It's fascinating that Donald Trump does appear to be modelling himself on Britain's Brexit campaign and hoping for a similar Brexit-style election shock. His campaign has echoed the words of Britain's Brexit campaigners. It's all about winning Independence Day. It's about giving the establishment, on this occasion in the form of Hillary Clinton, an electoral punch in the nose on behalf of the working classes. Here in the UK, in the referendum campaign, sentiments like those did appeal to people who felt disenfranchised, divorced from the wealth of the nation. In a similar way to the Brexit campaign, there's also been allegations from the Trump party of establishment conspiracies. The biggest surprise, possibly, just how closely Trump has identified with the Brexit campaign script. Britain's leading campaigner, Brexit campaigner Nigel Farage, even joined Trump on the presidential campaign trail. The result, says Trump, is going to be Brexit plus, plus, plus. And certainly the Brexit result here was a plus-size surprise. Trump's idea of dreaming big appears to be a Brexit import as well. Voters told during the referendum campaign in the UK that this was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to buck the system. Does it work? Well, it did for Brexit, and Donald Trump, as you were saying there, Elaine, was one of the few people who predicted that it would.
Richard, thanks so much. Throughout the night, Anna Naidu, host of CCTV America's The Heat, will be breaking down some of these issues with a panel of guests.
He joins us now with more on this rise of populism. Anand.
Thanks, Mike and Elaine. As Richard Bestick just explained, a rising populist sentiment in the United Kingdom led to that Brexit vote. Surprise, surprise, plus, as Richard Bestick said. That's a populist sentiment that also gave rise to Republican candidate Donald Trump and Democratic primary challenger Bernie Sanders. Now, here with me to discuss this, Afshin Malawi is a senior fellow in foreign policy at Johns Hopkins University, and Robert Moran is an expert in public opinion polling with Brunswick Insight. Gentlemen, nice to have both of you with us.
Thank you.
Afshin, we saw lots of anger, lots of disaffection this election season among many voters. They're upset with both political parties. They're upset with the way politics is conducted in this country, and they're looking for a new direction right now. Why?
You know, I think to some extent, your correspondent in London touched on this the idea that there are establishment conspiracies, the idea that there is a cabal somewhere, puppet masters running the global economy. And I think this is actually very dangerous. And you pointed out it's both on the Republican side with Donald Trump and on the populist left with the Bernie Sanders challenge. There is a real challenge to this ideas of free trade that have really been, by and large, a benefit to the United States of America. The post-World War II international architecture has been constructed by the United States of America, largely. And free trade, globalization, all of those have been net benefits for the United States. Now, there are always going to be winners and losers in the global economy. And what we're hearing is the scream of those who are losing, those who see a global economy, American economy, that favors coastal tech startups over Midwest manufacturers. And we haven't done enough in the United States to show those Midwest manufacturers, show those people who are losing from globalization that there is another path out.
Robert, we heard there may be conspiracies, as some people may think there are, but let's take a listen to Ron Paul. We interviewed him, we asked him why this country is so divided. Here's his opinion.
This class distinction and class fight is actually, the problem, but it's an economic consequence, but it's turned into racial and social conflicts, and that's why the people are so angry, and they're looking for scapegoats. For instance, well, it's the Chinese fault, it's the Mexicans' fault, blame somebody else, but never our own policies, and it's our policies that give us trouble. Too much debt, too much spending, too much taxes, too much regulation. That's why we become non-competitive, and we can't say, well, it's somebody else's fault.
Well, Ron Paul appears to think that the problem is right here in the United States.
Yes, I mean, Ron Paul's view here is a libertarian critique of populism. Ron Paul is a populist. But this story goes back way back in time. You could go back to 1992 in the Pat Buchanan run, where Pat Buchanan ran in the Republican primaries as very much a populist conservative. He ran again in 1996 as a populist conservative, did quite well. And in many ways, he's a forerunner of the Trump phenomenon. Trade, which is a big issue in this election, is an interesting topic in and of itself. If you go back far enough, you'll see that the Republican Party was a protectionist party at the end of the Civil War, switched positions during the Cold War and the architecture period that you're talking about, and now we see the parties switching again during this populist revolt, where you see Republicans becoming anti-trade, and we're seeing that in exit polls right now today. Protectionists and Democrats, especially younger Democrats, being pro-free trade. So a return to the 19th century to some regards. The challenge for the Republican Party is this. In 1992, 63% of the voters were non-college white voters, okay? Today that's 45%. So if populism gives Republicans a greater share of the non-college white vote, they're getting a larger share of a shrinking group. And mathematically, it does not help them in the 21st century. Sure, it might bail them out marginally, but long term, it's not a strategy.
Okay, we will have to see how populism affects the election outcome tonight. Let's send it back to Mike and Elaine.
All right, thanks a lot, Anand. And again, we are updating the tally in real time. It's the lower left corner of your screen. One state where votes are being counted right now is Ohio.
That's right. Polls just closed there just a short time ago. There are more than 11 million people who live in Ohio. It will award 18 electoral college votes. In both 2008 and 2012, voters there went for Barack Obama.
Now, Ohio has voted for the winning candidate in every election since 1964. And here's a look at where that vote count is right now. Democrat Hillary Clinton has about 53% of the vote. Republican Donald Trump has about 46.19% of the vote. CCTV's Jim Spellman looks at the politics at play in Ohio.
No U.S. presidential nominee from either major party has won without carrying the state of Ohio since 1960. Since then, it's been known as the ultimate swing state. The so-called Buckeye State closely mirrors the demographics of the United States as a whole, though with fewer Latinos. And the state's economy is a mix of struggling manufacturing hubs and thriving urban areas.
Ohio is split between rural communities with small towns and big cities like here in Cleveland. Those smaller communities tend to favor the Republicans and Donald Trump. Big cities like Cleveland tend to favor the Democrats and Hillary Clinton.
To win, the candidates need high turnouts in their strongholds. In Cleveland, Hillary Clinton held a rally last weekend with Beyonce and Jay-Z, and another with native Ohioan and NBA star LeBron James, all aimed at appealing to African Americans and young voters. Clinton also targeted female voters.
It's going to be the first woman president, and who could be prouder than women to have that?
In the rural areas of the state, all signs point to Donald Trump.
Oh, it's definitely Donald Trump territory. You know, we support him 100% here.
Trump has appealed directly to those communities which have been hit hard by the decline in U.S. manufacturing and the slowing coal industry. Ohio voters know it will be a tight race. Early voting turnout exceeded previous elections. Volunteers knew there was no room for error in the final hours of the campaign. Campaigns have saturated the airways with TV commercials, and many people have simply had enough.
I am excited because, for one thing, this is going to finally come to an end.
Some laughter there. Jim joining us now live from the Ohio capital of Columbus. Jim, polls closed just a short time ago. Just how tense is it there?
Oh, the energy here is undeniable. We've been traveling around the state, and everywhere we go, people are incredibly engaged in this race. And what it may come down to is what they call the ground game. And undeniably, Hillary Clinton has a more advanced ground game here. By some estimations, she outstaffs the Donald Trump campaign 5-1 in this state. We were at a polling place earlier today. There were 3 people campaigning outside for Hillary Clinton, and a Hillary Clinton election observer inside, and a Hillary Clinton election observer outside, and no Republican staff or volunteers. We saw similar scenes when we were out with volunteers over the weekend, Mike. But on the other hand, we've talked to dozens of Trump supporters. The enthusiasm they have for their candidate is pretty remarkable. We are seeing intense levels of dedication to Donald Trump. It seems like everything in Ohio has something else to balance it out. Mike?
Jim, Elaine here. We've mentioned that no U.S. president in the past 40 years has won without taking Ohio. So what role has the state played in this campaign?
Right, so that may actually change this year and beyond. Certainly, many people view this as pretty close to a must-win for Donald Trump, but it's not really a must-win for Hillary Clinton, and that's because the country is changing. The Rust Belt, as they call it here, where there used to be a lot of manufacturing jobs, still are, but this is becoming less important, and states with a lot of Latino immigration, Latino population rising, those states are becoming more important. So they're calling it this shift from the Rust Belt to the Sun Belt. So it could be changing in years to come. Tonight, it's a toss-up.
All right, CCTV's Jim Spellman live there in Columbus, Ohio. You know, one of the most important relationships on the planet is the one between the United States and China, and that's exactly how the U.S. and Chinese presidents put it.
But given this election, we wanted to know whether Americans think relations with China are getting better or are they getting worse. We commissioned a survey through Google Insights to find out the answer, and here's what we found. We asked, in what direction are U.S.-China relations headed?
Just 10% of Americans think relations between the U.S. and China are growing more positive. 45% think they are becoming more negative. And another 45% think they are staying the same. Again, only 1 in 10 Americans think relations are improving between the world's 2 leading economic superpowers.
In this campaign, as in others, the candidates have spent a lot of time bashing China. It's become a bit of a time-worn tradition in American politics.
Rochelle Akufo, co-anchor of CCTV's Global Business America, joins us now with an economic fact check on some of those claims. Rochelle.
That's right. Now, we want to explore the surprising role that China has played in this election cycle. Now, China has been in the spotlight at all 3 presidential debates and many campaign rallies. So let's take a closer look at exactly what the candidates have said about China. Now, Donald Trump has made criticism of China's trade practices a central campaign theme. He has vowed to formally label China a currency manipulator. Plus, he wants to impose tariffs on Chinese imports and bring, quote, unfair trade cases as punishment for what he believes are improper subsidies. Now, Trump has also claimed that China is stealing jobs from the United States. In fact, it's been a central point to his economic platform. Let's take a listen.
Our jobs are fleeing the country. They're going to Mexico. They're going to many other countries. You look at what China is doing to our country in terms of making our product. They're devaluing their currency, and there's nobody in our government to fight them. And we have a very good fight, and we have a winning fight, because they're using our country as a piggy bank to rebuild China. And many other countries are doing the same thing. So we're losing our good jobs, so many of them. We have to stop our jobs from being stolen from us. We have to stop our companies from leaving.
Now, Hillary Clinton has been less aggressive when it comes to her stance on China. In fact, she was a key player in President Obama's pivot to Asia when she served as his Secretary of State from 2009 to 2013. Though Clinton has said she will aggressively pursue trade cases and impose consequences against China when it commits trade abuses. She also opposes granting China market economy status. And Clinton has said she would treat cyber attacks from countries such as China like any other attack, and that the United States will be ready with serious political, economic, and military responses. Now, for more analysis on the role that China has taken on in this election process, let's cross to Beijing. My colleague and CCTV news anchor Tian Wei is there.
Thank you, Rochelle, from Beijing. I'm Tian Wei. As they say, if you walk alone, you walk fast, but if you walk with others, you walk further. So in that spirit, I'm joined here throughout this special program by two guests here in Beijing studio to talk about Chinese perceptions about U.S. presidential election and, of course, the China bashing issue. With me here, Einar Tangen, former president of the state of Wisconsin International Trade Council. Also, Mr. Yang Xiyu from the China Institute of International Studies. Professor Yang, I have to address that question to you first. First of all, why are Chinese so interested in the U.S. presidential election this time and very passionate about whatever is going on with the rhetorics of China bashing?
Well, very simple. Firstly, different presidents will mean different policy towards China between Clinton and Trump. And secondly, U.S. is the most influential power in this globe, especially in Asia. Different presidents will mean different policy towards Asia that will affect fundamentally China's external environment, affecting ordinary Chinese daily lives.
Of course, the Chinese are even setting up social media chat rooms about the U.S. presidential election. They debate among themselves, and they have bets all the time about who is likely to be the president. Having said that, though, Mr. Tangen, how much does it have to do, the China bashing degrees, with the U.S. presidential election by the two candidates? Shifting demographics, shifting coalitions, and the temperament and characteristics of these two candidates.
That's a whole issue we could do a show on.
I know, but 1 minute if you can.
Yeah, the issue is that you have two candidates who have very different worldviews. Donald Trump is playing to populism. You've heard about his ideas about China. But this is largely an issue of white middle-class workers who felt that they have been marginalized by changes. And the fact is that many of them have lost jobs, not due to China taking them, but to international competition, the marketplace, also robotics, just the sheer change of technology. But this has now become an issue in terms of race, the Latino vote, which the Republicans were looking to bring into their tent, has now been, it looks like, ostracized, maybe permanently. We'll have to see.
This is a very negative campaign, Mr. Yang, by two candidates in the U.S. How much does that impact the degree of China bashing also during the presidential election campaigns?
Well, for ordinary Chinese, they don't have much international knowledge. They think there are big difference between the two. For example, Hillary Clinton will be getting tougher policy than China, tougher than Trump. But for intellectuals, their analysis, different candidates will focus on different areas. Basically, no good. Both of them are quite tough for China, on China, but different areas. For Trump, trade, that is fundamental area for the bilateral relation and for China's economy.
Wow.
But for Hillary Clinton, they will get a more aggressive policy in China's surrounding areas, say the pivot or rebalancing. That will make more and more imbalances of China's external environment.
That at least is some of the perceptions here in China. Really, what the Chinese are saying about the U.S. presidential elections and also the degree of China bashing. Do they really believe it that the two candidates are going to exercise what they said? Well, China has always been a topic during the presidential election debate in the U.S., mostly due to Donald Trump this time, rhetoric and finger pointing. So how is Chinese public responding to Trump's China bashing approach? We interviewed some of them. Take a look.
And I think that Donald Trump has come to the China issue with an attitude, and he didn't offer many factual materials or information in the debate, but he just kept insisting on blaming China and even Russia for attacking the United States. But I wouldn't say a rational and reasonable person would believe what Donald Trump has said.
China is not stealing jobs. We've just been competitive. If we are competitive, we are more charming to those workers, then I think there are considerable amount of reasons why we are so-called stealing jobs.
可能是迎合美国一些人对于中国的，就是他们民众当中对中国的误解这个心理。
Trump 可能，反正从新闻上报道，感觉他可能更像是一个在选秀一样的去赢得民众的支持吧，可能，所以我觉得他在说的时候，可能在发表言论的时候，可能更加有点比较激进，可能是想博取更多人的支持吧。
因为川普他本身是个商人嘛，他作为一个商人来说，他这样子去评价这样去抨击，我觉得就是说这是一个他的一个商人的一个角色。
Well, those are some of the views from common Chinese we interviewed on the street in Beijing and elsewhere in China. And back to you in Washington, D.C.
Tianwei there in Beijing. Thanks so much. Let's update where we are in this race right now. Polls closed in several key states, among them Florida, Michigan, and Georgia.
And in some of those states that have closed, we can show you projected winners. The Associated Press has made all of these predictions. Again, blue states have gone to the Democrats, Hillary Clinton. Red states to the Republican, Donald Trump. And some of the most notable right now, you see the red states there, mostly in the middle of the country. Georgia, Alabama, South Carolina, Oklahoma going to Donald Trump. And here to help us understand what we're looking at is Eleanor Clift. She's a political analyst with the website Daily Beast. We want to look at Florida. Right now, that's been a big state that we've been watching. I'm looking at the map of Florida right now. You see a lot of red. Donald Trump has the very slight edge, but they're pretty much even there at the moment.
Yes, the lead has been going back and forth between the two of them all night, and whatever the result is, it's going to be very tight. Barack Obama won Florida in the last two elections, but he won it by a very slim margin. And Donald Trump considers Florida his second home. Mar-a-Lago, his very luxurious golf course and resort, is in Florida. And you have a lot of people in rural areas there who see Donald Trump as their savior, as their voice in this society, and they want to strike out against Washington. And you also have ethnic divisions. The Cuban vote in Florida was always very Republican. I think Barack Obama won it narrowly the last time, but it's still pretty heavily Republican. And you've got Marco Rubio, a Republican running for Senate in the state, who's actually running ahead of where Donald Trump is. So he's pulling some votes in as well. And then you've got a growing Puerto Rican population, which tends to be a little bit more on the Democratic side. So as we look at all of these races, the demographics are coming into play. And these states in the South, which were once kind of reliably white people, now are increasingly made up of people of color. And the Republicans have not done well with people of color, but they're doing very well with white people who feel like, many of them, that their country has been stolen from them. So you've really got this really polarization going on in the country that will be a challenge for whoever is elected president to make us all accept whoever wins and somehow begin to heal the divisions.
One of the fascinating statistics coming out of Florida, though, that came out even before people went to the polls today, is that in early voting, there were actually more votes than what we saw in 2000, when that race, of course, was what turned out to be the turning point in the 2000 campaign, Bush-Gore.
Right. Well, in the 2000 campaign, there were also It was a third party. Ralph Nader was running on the Green ticket. We haven't heard much this evening. There are there's a third and a fourth party. I was going to say two third parties, but that doesn't make sense. You have a Libertarian Party with Gary Johnson and William Weld, former Republican blue state governors, and then you have Jill Stein representing the Greens. Interest in them seems to have faded, but some Republicans who can't tolerate Donald Trump have found refuge in the Libertarian ticket. So nobody's mentioned yet that they are making much of a difference. But in close races, if they get 5–7% of the vote, they could tilt one of these states as well.
Eleanor, thanks so much for your observations.
Well, people all around the world are watching this election, and social media, as you can imagine.
That's right. Let's bring in another member of our team, CCTV correspondent Jessica Stone. She's live in our newsroom following the digital buzz.
And of course, Mike and Elaine, social media, really the currency of campaigning this cycle. We saw Hillary Clinton announce her candidacy in a video on Twitter just a year and a half ago. And of course, we've seen Donald Trump repeatedly use Twitter to talk about the size of his events, the types of performances that he had at the debates. Let me give you this figure. 3/4 of Americans have social media. And we know that just in the last, let's say, 12 to 16 hours alone between midnight and 6 p.m., 25 million people around the world use the hashtag election2016. So here's what they're posting in part. I want to take a look at what the campaigns are saying first. Hillary Clinton's campaign saying our neighbors in battleground states need your help. Really a get out the vote effort. Make calls to remind Hillary supporters to go vote. This happening just before the polls closed. Donald Trump talking about don't let up, keep getting out to vote. This election is far from over. We are doing well, but there's more time left. Really focusing on that state, as all of you have, of Florida. Both of these candidates really in a battle to duke it out in Florida. And Ming Bai writes to us on Weibo, Trump and Clinton share a similarity, intending to bash China when trying to get the vote. However, with either one of them being elected, there might actually be an increase in cooperation between U.S. and China. We should work closer together in the future. Perhaps there's a place for Ming Bai on our panel coming up. But, just to give you an idea how much voters are using social media, there was this big campaign for them to talk about having voted on Facebook. 7.5 million Americans showing on Facebook that they voted. So a lot of people using it to talk about the issues, to talk about voting, and to talk about their candidates. And in some cases, it's been the only place that people find out how to vote. Back to you guys.
Jessica, thanks so much. In just a moment, we'll continue our international analysis by looking at the role Russia has played in this election.
But first, let's quickly check in with what's going on inside the campaign parties. Both are happening right now in New York. Nathan King is covering Donald Trump, but first let's go to Sean Calebs. He is inside Hillary Clinton's election night headquarters. Sean, what can you tell us?
Well, there's a very hearty crowd here. Every time there's a hint of good news that comes up on the large screen behind me, you can hear this place explode. But right now, I think it's all the media. There are more than 2,000 media, a lot of them international, here chronicling the way that the events are playing out here. A great deal has been made about the fact that Donald Trump has a very, very narrow path to collect the necessary 270 electoral votes to become the next president of the United States. Narrow as it is, there is a path. The Clinton camp had been quite confident throughout the day. Hillary Clinton voted early near her home in Chappaqua, New York, and then made her way into the city. Really, the Clinton camp has been reaching out to Latino, Hispanic voters, as well as African-American voters. And we really saw that kind of take off over the past week to 10 days. Both President Barack Obama and his wife, First Lady Michelle Obama, getting out on the campaign trail, really telling voters what's at stake. Barack Obama's legacy, trying to get African-American voters to go out to the polls. By all accounts, the early information, black voting is down from 2008 and 2012, and that could cost Hillary Clinton. We'll find out later on tonight. Now let's go about 2 kilometers across town to Midtown, and my colleague, Nathan King.
Sean, I'm so glad you mentioned 2 kilometers, because it could be a world away, couldn't it? Every time your crowd cheers, this crowd boos, and every time they cheer when they get a state, your crowd probably boos too. It's too close to call. As Jessica was saying at the top, all eyes are on Florida. Florida can decide U.S. presidential elections going back to Al Gore and George W. Bush in 2000. Let's just tell you a quick thing about the crowd. They are starting to come in. These are all the VIPs from the Trump campaign. People who gave him a lot of money, people who gave him a lot of support, people who are involved with the Republican Party, who want to be seen with the most maverick candidate that they've ever fielded. But you're absolutely right, Sean, over the Javits Center. At the moment, far outnumbered by the world's media. We are really trying to get a take from the crowd about their internal polling, what they think is going on in the key swing states, whether they think things are going certain ways. I can tell you, no one is committing to a win or a loss right yet. They think it's going to go down to the wire. Back to you.
All right, thanks a lot, Nathan King with the Trump campaign. Let's turn our attention once again to how this election impacts the world. Russia has played a complicated role in this past year.
To say the least. We've seen everything from mutual compliments to allegations of hacking. CCTV's Julia Lvova gives us a look back from Moscow.
As Barack Obama leaves the White House after 8 years, Moscow says the two countries could have done more to end the bloodshed in Syria.
It seemed that after long negotiations, enormous efforts and difficult compromises, finally, a united front against terrorism was being created. But it didn't happen. It wasn't formed. Our personal agreements with the President of the United States didn't work.
Russia and the US say they both want to end the civil war, but disagree on how to do it. Russian aircraft are flying missions against anti-government rebels, calling them terrorists. The US supplies many of these groups with food and medicine, but no heavy weapons. With a new US president, Moscow is hoping for more cooperation in Syria. The Kremlin appears to think it might get that from Donald Trump. Trump says he would seek to repair ties with Russia and has made complimentary remarks about Vladimir Putin, which were reciprocated by the Kremlin. But as US Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton made no secret that she disliked Vladimir Putin, and the feeling was mutual. Clinton and the US government have accused Moscow of using hackers to tilt the election in Trump's favor. The FBI is investigating who provided WikiLeaks with thousands of emails and her staff. Moscow staunchly denies involvement.
The goal is not likely to be, well, let's make Trump the winner, but to sow distrust, to sow turmoil locally, not necessarily on a nationwide scale.
Ukraine is another flashpoint. The US and EU imposed economic sanctions against Russia over the conflict in eastern Ukraine. Moscow has repeatedly asked for an end to sanctions. They are lifted, many analysts remain skeptical that a thaw is possible, no matter who takes over the White House. Julia Lvova, CCTV, Moscow.
And we are joined live from Moscow now by Kevin Ozebek. And Kevin, let's talk about these allegations of hacking. What's been the reaction there?
Well, of course, we know the U.S. intelligence community says it has the evidence that the highest levels of the Russian government, that's the term that they use, are behind the hacking of the emails of the DNC and Clinton campaign manager John Podesta. Now, in the past few weeks, when President Vladimir Putin has made public appearances and has been asked about this, he's always denied it, saying there's no way Russia could meddle in this election, and Russia could never try to influence voters in a powerful country like the United States. Now, even though he's saying that, there are some reasons to question his sincerity there. When you take a look at the media coverage here in Russia, this is a country where most of the media is either controlled or very heavily influenced by the Kremlin. I just want to show you some of the headlines of the local newspapers that came out on Tuesday. This one has the headline, 25 years of Clinton family scandals. This tabloid right up there advertises a story about numerous plastic surgeries that Hillary Clinton has had. Of course, this was never confirmed by her. This has never even been reported in the U.S. press. And if you take a look at these papers, you won't find Donald Trump anywhere on here. The Russian media has been very anti-Clinton. It's absolutely vilified her while it's propped up Donald Trump. Russia is Donald Trump territory. Polling here shows that if the U.S. presidential election was held in this country, Trump would win in a landslide, and people say that is largely due and can be attributed to the fact that Russian media really has pummeled Hillary Clinton.
Kevin, it is no secret that relations have really soured between Washington and Moscow. And from Russia's perspective, what can the next U.S. president do to boost them?
Well, the short answer from political experts that I've spoken to here say nothing. They expect relations to remain sour for at least the next few years, and they say that's regardless of who the winner is. They say if Hillary Clinton wins, obviously she's going to take a tough stance, but also probably will show that she's willing to work with Putin. They say if Donald Trump wins, it's a big no, but he can find it probably pretty tough to try to warm relations because in the West there's just little popularity of President Putin.
Kevin Ozebek live for us there in Moscow. Thanks so much. So where do things go from here for the United States and Russia? And what about the impact on relations between Russia and its neighbors?
Both are critically important questions. So for some analysis, let's head back to Anand.
Thanks, Elaine. Relations between Russia are at their lowest point in decades, as we've been hearing. Can President Clinton or Trump chart a new course with Russian President Putin? And what are European expectations for a new U.S. presidency? Joining us now is Nicholas White. He's an expert in international affairs and Senior Director of Global Solutions for APCO's Brussels office. Nicholas, thanks for joining us.
Good evening.
Right, I want to get to Russia in a moment, but let's talk first about what European expectations are for this election. I know this is a general question, but what are European views on Clinton and Trump?
Clinton is very much a known quantity. She was Secretary of State, of course, for 4 years in the first half of the Obama administration. She was First Lady under her husband, and she's also a very well-known figure in the international scene. So for Europeans, she's a known quantity. She's perhaps more hawkish than President Obama has been. That, to an extent, is reassuring for a lot of European leaders who depend very much on the American shield, on the Euro-Atlantic connection. President Trump is seen as a much more disruptive possibility. What Trump has said about NATO, what he has said about Russia, this is profoundly unsettling to a lot of European leaders, to a lot of European citizens. The fact that one of his senior allies described Estonia as being a suburb of St. Petersburg didn't go down terribly well in Estonia or indeed in neighbouring countries either. So I think one could say generally that Europeans are broadly in favour of Clinton as better to have somebody that you know than the potential disruption of a Trump presidency.
Right, we talked a moment ago about populism here in the United States. You've also had that phenomenon, that kind of sentiment in Europe as well. We've seen it in many countries. If Donald Trump should win this election, should become president of the United States, how much of a boost would that be for populism in Europe?
Some claim him as their allies, and in this country, in the United Kingdom, Nigel Farage, the leader of the UK Independence Party, has claimed very strong links with Trump. He sees this as a sign of endorsement for him and for his policies. But at the same time, the point about populists is that they go country by country. And it's a boost for populists in one country may not be the same for their neighbours next door. The French and Germans are not all that closely linked. It's the mainstream politicians there who sort of reinforce each other. And the same is true in the Netherlands, the same is true in Hungary and Poland. So one can't generalise too much. Clearly, the bigger effect is that President Trump will disrupt the existing system, and that in a case for new voices to come in and perhaps upset what has been there before. So there's an indirect effect, I think, in which Trump would help populism, directly less so.
Europe has played a big role in this election campaign here in the United States. Donald Trump especially has been very critical of some European countries, saying that they're not paying their dues for their defense, for their membership of NATO, that they need to pay more money. Should he become president, will he be able to work with these European leaders to forge a common destiny for these traditional allies?
Well, actually, that's a rare point of common ground between Trump and Clinton. It's been pretty clear from the Washington received view is that the Europeans need to raise their game in terms of their contributions to defence. Perhaps Clinton has put it in a more tactful way than Trump has done, but the basic message from the other side, from your side of the Atlantic, is the same, that Europeans need to be doing more about their own defence. Now, the question is, will America step back and leave them to it? And the hints from Trump are that he is likely to do that. The mood music from Clinton is that she will not, that under her America will remain there, but there will still, from both, be an expectation that Europeans themselves must do more.
Nicholas White talking to us there from London. Thank you, Nicholas. Mike and Elaine, back to you.
All right, thanks, Anna. And let's turn our attention now to a neighbor of the United States who, until recently, might as well have been a world away. We're talking about Cuba.
It was in December of 2014 that Presidents Barack Obama and Raul Castro announced a deal to restore full diplomatic ties. That ended a freeze of more than 50 years. A U.S. embargo still exists, but both sides have lifted many restrictions on everything from tourism to trade, even medicine.
And Donald Trump might reverse course while Hillary Clinton wants to keep moving in the same direction. Let's discuss this all now with CCTV's Michael Voss. He is live for us in Havana. So, Michael, what's at stake here for Cuba?
Elaine, what's at stake here potentially is the future of détente and everything that goes with it, both politically and economically. Remember, until President Obama, U.S. policy towards Cuba was generally more about domestic politics than foreign relations. The hardline anti-Castro Cuban Americans in the key swing state of Florida had an enormous influence on U.S. policy towards the island. Obama decided that trying to isolate Cuba was instead isolating the United States around Latin America. If post-election all of this changes, then it could damage the Cuban economy and U.S. prestige in Latin America.
U.S. President Barack Obama's historic visit to Cuba marked the end of one of the last conflicts of the Cold War. Havana is full of visiting Americans now that diplomatic relations are restored. They can stay at a Sheraton hotel and fly here on commercial U.S. airlines. The JetBlue exhibit was a big hit with Cubans at this month's Havana International Trade Fair. But are they worried about what will happen with a new president in the White House?
If Trump wins, we will lose all the negotiations achieved so far. I hope he changes his mind and supports Cuba.
I think with Trump or Hillary, the fight will continue. It's good business for the Americans and for the Cubans as well.
They don't care if it's Clinton or it's Trump. Whoever it is, they want the end of the embargo, regular trips, vacations, normal relationship. That's all.
What everyone here is relieved about is that neither Marco Rubio nor Ted Cruz won the Republican nomination. Both have Cuban parents and had threatened to close the embassies and reverse the détente.
As Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton had urged President Obama to restore diplomatic relations and wants the trade embargo lifted. But Cubans remember that her husband, former President Bill Clinton, actually tightened the embargo. Donald initially said he didn't oppose Obama's policy, but would have struck a better deal. But that position hardened, and in Florida he announced that he would reverse the process and let Cuba release political prisoners and allowed religious freedom.
Cuba has absolute religious freedom. He was told to say that, and that might be, interesting for a decreasing minority of hardline right-wing Republican Cuban Americans, but that's not the position of most Cuban Americans.
Just how far attitudes have changed among Cuban Americans in Florida could help determine the outcome of the U.S. presidential election.
Michael, the decision to normalize relations with Cuba has been popular in the United States. Nearly 6 in 10 Americans want the embargo or the blockade to end. Just look at President Barack Obama's approval ratings. It's at the highest level in years. So what do Cubans think about all of this?
When it comes to approval ratings, President Obama is more popular than either Raul Castro or Fidel Castro, according to an unofficial opinion poll taken just before his historic visit here. When it comes to the embargo, the Cubans know that it's up to Congress, not the president, to lift it. So actually the race for the House and Senate could be more important here. Also remember that for Obama, Cuba is a legacy issue, and several times he used his executive powers to loosen the trade. Even if Hillary Clinton wins, Cuba will not have that same level of priority for her.
And Michael, you referenced the Cuban-American vote in the United States. How has that changed over the years?
Elaine, I think several factors here. One is that the older generation who left after the revolution, having lost their businesses and their homes, They are getting old now. The majority, but not all of them, remain deeply opposed to any rapprochement with Cuba. It's a different picture with their children and their grandchildren, where attitudes are much more mixed. Many of this generation are interested in their roots. They've actually traveled back to Cuba to see what it's really like. Then you've got the Cuban immigrants who came here over the last decade or two. These are generally economic migrants, not political refugees. They're sending money back to support their families. They're flying back regularly. They don't want to see the embassies closed.
Michael Voss live for us there in Havana. Thanks so much. Let's take a look at the national map as we continue to track the votes that are coming in so far. Still as early as you can see, but Donald Trump now picking up Mississippi as well. Some of the states that are traditionally vote Republican, very much in his column again this evening.
That's right. Right now we're seeing Hillary Clinton with 48 electoral votes. Donald Trump slightly ahead with 66 electoral votes. Again, you need 270 to win to become president of the United States.
And there is this tradition of political satire in the United States. Since before the country was created, people have been making light of the rough and tumble of politics.
Sure need it this year. One of the most popular forms dating back hundreds of years is political cartooning. Here are some examples from the past few months. You might recognize this one as a famed Lincoln Memorial, except in this case, the 16th president of the United States, Abraham Lincoln, has his face covered by a paper bag. He's embarrassed at the political process that has played out.
And another one shows the intense political divide in the United States. Two people in the same car, each wanting to go in totally different directions.
And then there's this one. Uncle Sam, a mascot of sorts for the United States, is choking on the political process here. A voter is trying to save him. That last cartoon was drawn by Pulitzer Prize-winning cartoonist Mike Lukovich.
We wanted to get a sense of what it takes to make a great political cartoon. He was nice enough to show us.
School, my dad was transferring around a lot, so I draw the team. He's really got some interesting characteristics. He's got very tiny eyes. He's got really bushy, light eyebrows. They're always kind of frowning. And then you know, he's with his mouth when he's speaking. It's like he's got this little these pursed lips. But then when he's trying to look tough, like Mussolini-ish, he has this, you know, where he's like a frown. So he's really a weird-looking dude. Capturing a likeness is always a really fun thing for me. And if I can really get it to look like him, it's like I'm just so happy. Hillary, her eyes are pretty small. I found a picture on Google of her laughing, and that's she has been criticized for her laughter because it's kind of maniacal. I'm going to try and capture that maniacal look that she has when she laughs. And she's got a fairly small nose. You know, she's got really great hair, but it's a semi-helmet. But I think it looks good. She should have a little color since Trump is orange.
I think you nailed it.
Weird looking dude. I like that thought. As we get set for another hour of election coverage, let's get a check of what else is happening around the world. Francis Koh joins us live here with a news update. Francis?
Thanks, guys. Well, Chinese Premier Li Keqiang is heading home after wrapping up his visit to Russia. He met President Vladimir Putin at the Kremlin. Both sides have signed a series of agreements ranging from trade to the construction of nuclear power plants. Premier Li also visited Latvia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan. The trip was meant to strengthen China's role in Eurasia and promote the Belt and Road Initiative. Russia is the last stop on his tour. Beijing has a message for governments overseas regarding Hong Kong.
Hong Kong is a special administrative region under the Chinese central government, and its affairs fall within China's domestic domain. Interpreting articles of laws by the National People's Congress is a legal right entitled by the SAR's Basic Law, Implementing the responsibilities stipulated under the Constitution is a total domestic affair within China's sovereignty, and no foreign countries have the right to intervene in it.
Earlier, the U.S. State Department said it was disappointed by developments in the Hong Kong Legislative Council. 2 candidates are barred from taking their seats because they insulted China when taking their oaths. Beijing is urging other countries to avoid meddling. Iraqi authorities have opened an investigation into a mass grave discovered just south of Mosul. Inside, dozens of bodies, many of them decapitated. Troops made the gruesome find on Monday during their offensive to take back the city from ISIL. No word on the victims, but a child's stuffed animal was discovered at the scene. Day 3 of a key meeting on climate change will get underway in just a few hours. Dozens of leaders are in Morocco for the 22nd Conference of the Parties, or COP22. The goal, implementing the final steps in the landmark Paris Agreement on climate change. One key focus on Tuesday, aiming to restore the world's forests. It's estimated deforestation accounts for 12% of carbon emissions every year. The conference will continue through next Friday. And that's a look at what's happening around the world. I'm Frances Coe. CCTV's special coverage of the U.S. presidential election continues now.